I just poked myself in the eye. This book is the holy friggin' grail. Okay, it's honestly one of my top 5 of all time because I found it so incredibly validating as a witchy psychic who is skeptical of witchy psychicness. I also found it to be the perfect parapsychological primer. It made a case for what I have believed my entire life, which is that magic is just natural phenomena that we don't understand yet. But that's not to say that the scientific method cannot be applied to these things. In fact, it can. This book goes into that. This channel, if you've been here before, you know we're all about that. Subscribe! But the scientific method is designed to help us understand physical phenomena, and when we are talking about the magical and the psychic and phenomena not previously understood, we're talking about non-physical phenomena.
Meanwhile,
we're talking about consciousness. So hello and welcome back to Ideas Sex, where we take an analytical lens to mysticism, spirituality, the esoteric, and phenomena not previously understood. And today I am going to be sharing a review and summary of this book, Real Magic by Dean Radin. It is bookworm approved. Worm with a W-Y-R-M, like a dragon. Get it? My mom thinks I'm clever. We rise up from the dust and clean my throat. We have looked at a few of Dr. Radin's studies on this channel already. If you're not familiar with him, he is the chief scientist at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, who are leading researchers in non-local consciousness. And Dr. Radin has perhaps done more than anyone else in trying to bring psi to the mainstream. And what I like about his work is that it's more accessible than a lot of the other things that I have read. You know, when you read the papers, or even when you read someone like Sheldrake, it can be very like academic and technical. But this was a breezy 200 pages infused with Dr. Radin's quintessential humor. He's very funny, and he has a gift for breaking down these complex concepts into ways that the average person, the plebs like you and me, can understand. Which is especially important when it comes to explaining things that most people don't believe exist. Early on in the book, Dr. Radin tackles the stigma around parapsychology when he writes, "In the public's mind, parapsychology is associated with the exciting tabloid stories about Bigfoot's role in the Illuminati, secret alliances between UFOs and the Transportation Security Administration, telepathic aliens in cahoots with the shadow government, and so on. These stories are fun to read while waiting in the grocery store checkout lane, but from a mainstream perspective, only the lunatic fringe takes them seriously. The association between psi and tabloid fare is more than annoying. It's a big problem. The false but perceived connection is petrifying to anyone whose career depends on credibility, and in science, credibility is essential. So all fledgling scientists learn to maintain a serious, sober demeanor at all times, even if they're secretly wearing Spider-Man underwear." Oh, it's not a secret with me, Dr. Radin. I wear that shit on the outside of my pants. But I'm also not a scientist. So we are immediately immersed into the strange and wonderful world of psi, and the field is surrounded by these kind of bizarre dynamics where there are a lot of scholarly, academic, sciencey types who are interested in this stuff, but they have to feign disinterest or even like scoff at it because they want to be taken seriously. And so they have to write this stuff off as hokey, even though a lot of people suspect that there is something to all of this. And I wonder how often in history that's happened.
flashback.
Oh, come now, Galileo Galilei. It does not revolve around the sun. Always on about those phases of Venus you are. It cannot be true. It cannot be possibly true because, well, we've never believed it before. And I don't want the church to kill me. So, you're a conspiracy theorist. So in these early chapters, he gives us some context into understanding the fields that he works in and how it came to be that people no longer believe in these phenomena that we have believed in throughout history. Not just believed in, but worked with, right? Whether it was through religion, oracles, prophets, shaman, folk healers, medicine people, all that entire facet of life, right? It is about interacting with the divine. It is about interfacing with the mystical underpinnings of life. And ironically, some forms of science have their roots in arts no longer practiced, right? Astronomy used to be astrology. Chemistry used to be alchemy. And so what's the difference? What is the difference between the modern versions of these practices and their older counterparts? Well, the modern versions have been stripped of the role of consciousness. They no longer take into account the fact that there is a field of consciousness, call it God, call it consciousness, call it source, call it spirit, whatever, that we are interfacing with on a daily basis, every moment of our lives, mostly unconsciously. And it makes me laugh just a little bit because like it should be so obvious. I think it should be obvious that there's more to the human experience than our five senses can perceive. And yet the people who pride themselves on being the most logical and the most intelligent, the scientists, the engineers, the academics, are the ones who are the most resistant to the possibility of these things, right? You write it off as like pseudoscience or hocus pocus or bullshit. And the reason that happens is because they've gotten so locked into a singular mode of thinking, right? That left brain thinking. What sparked this willful ignorance? In 1917, German sociologist and philosopher Max Weber defined a key feature of modern Western society. It's disenchantment. Weber was referring to a growing conviction among scientists and scholars of the early 20th century that supernatural concepts were outdated. There was no longer any need for mysterious incalculable forces, magic, or spirits. There was also no need for institutions that relied on such ideas. Hint, religion. Memories of 1,000 years of intellectual dominance by religious authorities were painfully fresh, so the rise of the disenchanted world became a welcome gust of freedom. Now, here's my thoughts on that. I think that last line is super interesting because it almost suggests that the rejection of magic was not a purely logical thing. It was a reactionary thing to the church. And this is something that we've seen throughout history, right? That ideological pendulum swing where you go too far in a direction and people don't like it when you go too extreme in any direction, right? But what happens is rather than bringing it back to balance, which is what people ultimately want, we push so far in the opposite direction, right? And so one example would be living in a masculine society. We've lived in a hyper-masculine society for the last 2,000 years, and it's created a lot of problems. And now we're sort of swinging in the opposite direction, right? But it's kind of swinging in the direction of man-hating, for example. And so it's too far in the opposite direction. Ultimately, everyone wants to be in the middle. We want to be balanced. But for some reason, humans have to go through this process of I'm over here and I'm over here, and eventually I find my way back to center. And I think it's the same thing with this tug of war between religion and science, right? There was a point in time where the church ruled everything. They controlled everything. You couldn't ask a question. You couldn't explore possibility. And that was exhausting, especially for people who are curious about the nature of the universe, right? And so there was a reaction to that, and then we swung too far in the opposite direction. Ironically, where we are now is not so different because we're at this point in society where we're not allowed to ask questions and we're not allowed to consider the possibilities. So it's a little bit ironic that that's happened. But the other thing that's happened is that in totally rejecting the divine and the mystical and the spiritual, we have almost lost our sense of wonder, I think. And perhaps most importantly, we have forgotten that there is this divine force connecting all things called consciousness, right? AKA God. That's what it was called throughout history. But we've always had that understanding up until recently. And this pendulum swing has caused us to be like, yeah, that. It's like humanity has entered its rebellious teenage years and we're like disenchanted and we're existential because we had this helicopter mom beat us over the head with a Bible for 2,000 years. And something like that happens. And of course, you sort of reject the faith, so to speak, right? But I think that, as we grow up, we may realize that, yeah, that parent had control issues, but ultimately there may have been some merit to what they were trying to tell us. And maybe we don't need to throw baby Jesus out with the consciousness bathwater. You know what I'm saying? And I think it's also worth noting that magic is a 30,000-year-old practice, right? And that's not something that Dr. Radin throws out in this book. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but that's a number that I often hear shamanic types throw out because shamanism has been traced back to ancient Siberia. And so how is it that something that has been part of us for so much of our history, it no longer exists according to the majority of people? I find that really interesting. And it also makes me wonder, how long can we deny divinity? How long can we deny that there is a spiritual component to life? If spirituality is right and religion and mysticism and all of this stuff that's been so intrinsic to the human experience throughout history, if that's right, and we are spiritual beings having a human experience, then how long can we pretend that the physical is all there is? I don't think we can get away from it, y'all. I think that the pendulum is going this way currently, but I think in our lifetime, we're going to see it start to come to center, which is why I'm so interested in that bridge between spirit and science. Dr. Radin does give us a brief history of magic in which he traces it from ancient times, the Middle Ages, the Industrial Age, all the way up to Carl Jung and the modern day. Then he spends a chapter explaining the practice of magic, how it's done, principles that might make it possible, a couple of DIY projects. And I just want to touch on one thing from this chapter. It's a section called Does This Really Work? In my experience in both life and the lab, yes, magic does. Not every time and not always with the greatest fanfare, but it works often enough to raise an eyebrow. In life, the desired outcome usually manifests in the form of a meaningful synchronicity. In a laboratory study, it manifests as a statistically significant test of a hypothesis. The key elements in both cases are focused intention and openness to the idea that the desired outcome has already been achieved and very clear goals. And then he gets into the science. Psst, this is why you should read the book. Like I said, it's only a 200-page book, but I think it's a really excellent summary of parapsychological research so far. And he chooses his studies based on their statistical significance. So how likely it is that these things are chance. And he has this marker that he uses called 6 sigma. And when a class of experiments exceeds the 6 sigma threshold, that means that they are calculated at odds of 1,000,000,000 to 1. In other words, like fat chance, their chance. And there are 6 kinds of experiments that he tells us have exceeded 6 sigma. And they are telepathy, remote viewing, presentiment, implicit precognition, random number generators, and the Global Consciousness Project. The Global Consciousness Project is like random number generators on a mass scale. We'll talk about that soon on this channel. And if you're interested in learning more about 6 sigma, I have a video on that there. And we've actually covered quite a bit of this already. I would highly recommend this book, by the way, to anyone who's interested in learning more about psi, who wants to get their toes in the water, who just wants probably the best summary that is easily accessible out there. So 11 out of 10 recommends. And yeah, tell me what you think. Do you believe in these things? Why or why not? I would love to have Idea Sex with you in the comments. And in any case, thank you so much for joining me on Idea Sex today. Hail to the power and the sight, and until next time, I hope you stay very, very blessed, my friends. The Mad Witch. Oh, I forgot the bookworm approved part. Damn it.